everyone, it's Beth from Beth's Paper Cuts, and I am doing a tutorial today for Splitcoaststampers. I was super happy to be asked to make one, and I am going to share a watercolor technique. I love anything watercolor, so I'm going to play with my inks, but I'm going to use some watercolor techniques. It's a wet on wet watercolor technique, but I'm calling it bleeding hearts because we're kind of going to have the color bleed from one heart shape into the next. So some supplies you need is watercolor paints, or I'm using a water-based ink. And you're going to need paintbrushes and water. And I'm using some 140-pound cold press watercolor paper. And then for a heart shape, you can either draw your own, or I think it's super easy to trace, and you can trace some dies. I happen to have a set that's got some dies in it that I'm going to use. And I'm going to trace them with a watercolor pencil. The nice thing about that is when you add your water, it's going to kind of disappear into your project. So I'm going to go ahead and trace my small hearts for this first sample. And I'm not overlapping the hearts, I'm just having them come right up next to each other. Now you can use a regular pencil if you don't have a watercolor pencil. Just go very lightly, maybe even take your eraser and go over it once lightly to kind of make the image even softer. Okay, now I've chosen some colors here. I've got Magenta Madness and Gorgeous Grape, and I use my ink as watercolor all the time, so I just go right from the lid. But you can go and use some sort of watercolor receptacle if you so choose. Okay, so I have put some ink in my lid. I might need a little more magenta. And I'm going to use a aqua painter. I love to use these because the water is already in the barrel for me, but you can use any paintbrush you have. And what you want to first do is add water only to your first heart. So get it good, and you don't want a pool of water, but you want it definitely wet. Okay, then you're going to go ahead and add your ink. Now you want to add some water to your ink. You don't want to go straight ink. And just let it kind of go into the shape. It's going to naturally kind of go where it's already wet. But you might want to help it along, fill in some little areas if it's not moving everywhere. Okay, next we're going to move on to our second heart, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to add water. Kind of stay away from your first heart. Start on the opposite side and fill this in. And then when we get next to our first heart, we're going to go ahead and let our brush touch. And that will cause that to bleed. You can even tip your paper a little bit if you want the bleed to be a little stronger. And now we're going to add some Gorgeous Grape. Okay, we're going to move on to the next one. I'm going to clean my brush a little bit. It's going to be a little pink. That magenta ink really loves to cling to things. It's a very strong pigment. And speaking of pigments, not all pigments want to blend and bleed as well as others. So play around maybe on a scratch paper first and see if your color choices or your inks are going to blend as well. Right now, as I get close to this heart, I'm going to go ahead and let it touch. And if you want, you can tilt your paper and help it along. And now we're going to go ahead and add that magenta. And see, the magenta wants to take over. It wants to go into that grape. Such a strong pigment. And we're going to repeat. Last heart. Fill it in. It's meant to be water only, but I didn't clean my brush. And then when you get up close to that other heart, go ahead and give it a little kiss. And let it bleed through. There you go. There is your bleeding heart technique. Now you can zap this with your heat gun if you want to dry up some of your petals, but just be careful not to push your ink together too much when you do that. And here's, every time you do it, you're going to get a different look. So here's one I did earlier. It dries a little lighter. Here's another one. It's really fun. I thought we'd do one more with some larger hearts. So again, I'm going to grab some dies that I have and trace them. Okay, we're going to fill in our heart with water. Now this is a larger area, so you need to work faster. Let's fill in our second heart. As you can see, I have some grapes still left on my brush. I didn't clean it very well. I'm using 2 aqua painters because I didn't want to have to refill the barrels with water. But you can just use the 1 paintbrush and clean in between each one. Alright, and then as I get close to this one, I'm going to give it a little kiss and let that magenta come on over. And you can help it along by tilting your paper. Alright, there is my 2 bleeding hearts. I would love to show you some other samples that I've made using the bleeding heart technique. So you can take your images and cut them down and use them in a card. So here is this first one. And here's 1 heart. I just kind of dropped color in and let all the colors bleed. And here's a 2 heart. And the color bleeding really shows nicely when you use different colors too, because then you've got a yellow and blue make green and a pink and yellow make orange. So this is a really fun one. And then here I kind of bled it all across 1 heart. Now you can do a similar thing with colors that are closer, but you just don't see the definition of the bleeding so much, but it is still fun to watercolor some hearts. So here's another one using kind of lighter colors. So I would love to see what you do with the bleeding hearts watercolor technique, and show us in the gallery that's set aside just for this technique. These will all be there as well. Thanks for watching. Bye.